Okay, welcome everybody. If I get this PowerPoint going. So, anyway, so this is my cat here, Mercedes. Random pick, but this is her after me going to Las Vegas with Ryan Lowry to present some data at a big conference. So today we're going to talk about part 2 of endurance, and we're going to get into other variables besides VO2 max that impact performance. So if you think about it, there are a number of other variables that do impact performance, and one of those I'm sure you've heard of is lactate threshold. So basically, there are a lot of events where all the athletes have high VO2 maxes. If they all have high VO2 maxes, what separates them? Well, what separates them is the percentage of the VO2 max you can actually use without accumulating large amounts of lactic acid in the muscle. Right? So you got to think about, if you 100% of the maximal oxygen consumption you can use, you can't run at 100% VO2 max because you're going to tire out. What is preventing you from running at that? Well, it's the time point at the percentage of your VO2 max where you start to accumulate a lot of lactate and you can't continue. This is lactate threshold. So lactate threshold is basically the point where lactate begins to exponentially build up in the blood with increasing intensity, right? So basically, normally it's increasing linearly, but you hit a critical threshold where it skyrockets. There's a second variable called maximum lactate steady state, and that's basically the time point that you can maintain a steady state of lactate, but if you go any higher, you can't. Okay, so let me sort of explain this to you because it's a little bit difficult concept. What happens is, again, say you're going like 5 miles an hour and you go to 6 miles an hour. Lactic acid is going to go up, but it might go up linearly. If you go from 6 to 7 miles an hour, it might go up again linearly. But then you go to 7 to 8, it might jump up a lot higher than predicted from the previous values. What's going on is that your clearance mechanisms are essentially being exceeded, so that now every single time you increase intensity, you pay the price that much more. Because again, you're not able to clear it as rapidly. Okay, so that's lactate threshold. Now, maximum lactate steady state occurs at a higher percentage than that. So, let's think of it like this. Go back to this. You go 6 miles an hour, your lactic acid goes up, but if you keep 6 miles an hour, it's going to plateau out. Okay? So, say that's 4 millimolars of lactate. Then you go to 7 miles an hour, it goes up, maybe to like 6 millimolars of lactate. But if you maintain 7 miles an hour, you'll maintain 6 millimolars of lactate. Say you go to 8 miles an hour, it goes up maybe to 7 millimolars of lactate. But if you stay there, it'll maintain. Then you go to 9 miles an hour, you go up to like 8 millimolars, and you try and maintain that pace, and it slowly creeps up to like 9 millimolars, 10 millimolars. What's going on is that it's completely exceeded your capacity to keep pace with it, so you can't maintain a steady state. So maximum lactate steady state for that person would be 8 miles per hour. Okay? So basically, it's the percentage of your VO2 max that you can maintain a maximal lactate steady state. And once you've reached that point, you can go about 45 to 60 minutes if you're well trained. So lactate threshold occurs before maximum lactate steady state. It's a nonlinear increase in lactate. And maximum lactate steady state is the maximum percentage of VO2 max you can maintain a constant steady state of lactate. In untrained people, that occurs from 50 to 70% of their VO2 max or heart rate reserve. If you're collegiate, lactate threshold doesn't occur till 70% of your VO2 max. So lactate threshold is occurring when generally maximum lactate steady state would occur in untrained. And then they don't hit maximum lactate steady state for 85% of their VO2 max, so they can maintain 85% for about 45 to 60 minutes. And then if you look at the elite Olympic, lactate threshold doesn't occur till 90. So they're freaks of nature. And then 95 is basically maximum lactate steady state. So think about that for a second. You're not hitting lactate threshold until 90%. I mean, it's really unheard of to even think about something like this. So the other thing to understand is the elite Olympic have double a VO2 max as the untrained, right? So they might have an 80 on VO2 max, and untrained might have a 40, right? Collegiate might have 65. So to put it in perspective, that's insane. So how do we train lactate threshold? Well, it's all about specificity. You got to minimum train lactate threshold. So here they took untrained people, and they had them train at lactate threshold. And notice that by training at lactate threshold, they increased lactate threshold by around 50%. The ones who train at 44% VO2 max, which is below lactate threshold, only increased 18%. So basically what this tells us that you need to train at least at lactate threshold to push it back. Now, in this study, basically they took untrained people, and for the first 4 weeks they trained one group, which is the dark group, at lactate threshold, and they trained the light group at greater than lactate threshold. For the first 8 weeks, it didn't make a difference. But when you got to week 12 and 16, it did make a difference. You actually got better gains past lactate threshold. What this tells us is that after being moderately trained, to get increases in lactate threshold, you're going to have to likely train at maximum lactate steady state. So you need to train at much higher intensities. So let's go back to this. Basically, if you're trying to figure out like what do I need to do, well, someone who's untrained, they might be able to go 50 to 70% of their heart rate reserve or VO2 max to push back lactate threshold. College cyclists probably need to go around 85%. An elite Olympic really need to go definitely greater than 90% and maybe close to 100%. But of course, the college cyclist, it's not going to hurt them to go 90% or above. And that's what we say here, untrained to recreationally trained, 50 to 70% heart rate reserve, college, greater than 85%, Olympic, near VO2 max. All right, so here's one of the great mysteries. There's literally been millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars put into this question. Think about who dominates the Olympics in terms of long distance running. In general, superior fatigue resistance of elite South African distance runners allows them to dominate pretty much everybody. But why? I recently went to a symposium in American College of Sports Medicine, and you had all the top scientists in the world there. And like I said, they're actually creating gene banks of all the elite endurance athletes in the world, trying to figure out what separates them. Okay? So what I can tell you what they are finding is that all of the elite endurance athletes, white, black, doesn't matter what they are, all of them have genetic components that make them the way they are. The question is, if you take all the elites, is there a genetic component that separates them from each other? So let's look. Why do black South Africans, like Ethiopians, Kenyans, why do they dominate? Well, if we look here, VO2 max values between the elite black athletes and the elite white athletes are virtually the same, 71 and 71. So VO2 max is not explaining it. Now, if you go to distances run, right, the shorter the time, the better. If you look at white runners, they start off, when you go 1.65 kilometers or even 3 kilometers, the white runners are running just as fast as the black runners. But when you go out to like 21 kilometers, really far distance, there's a drastic difference in the elite black athletes and the white. In other words, they're shaving a lot of time off. And you can see that on 21 kilometers. 62 versus 67. So they're smoking their counterparts. So one of the things we think that is due to is fatigue resistance. If you look at the shorter races, the white and the black athletes can run at around the same intensities. But as you move out to greater distances, the elite Ethiopians and Kenyans, they are maintaining a higher percentage of their VO2 max, whereas the other group's fading. They can't maintain that percentage, right? And as you can see, they're going out 21 kilometers and running at close to 90% of their VO2 max, whereas the white runners are about 85%, okay? So then if we look at changes in lactate concentration at different velocities, 15 kilometers, 17 to 24, the white athletes are accumulating much more lactate. So what's happening is that it's very likely that the black athletes have much higher lactate thresholds than the white athletes. So is it genetics or training? Well, if we go here, you look at total training kilometers per week, the white athletes and the black athletes, statistically there's no difference here. No difference in total running volume. So from that you conclude genetic. Well, here's the problem. At the place I went to with all the top experts in the world, they've been looking at all the genes that regulate endurance performance, and while those genes differ from the normal population in both white and black elite athletes, they haven't found anything to show differences between the two. Now, we have a lot to learn about genetics, that's for sure. What we know in genetics is a drop in an ocean of comprehension, right? So we barely know nothing. But from what we do know, we're not detecting it. But their training's the same, so it must be genetics. Well, is volume the only thing regulating training adaptation? Is there any other component you could think of besides how long you go? That's right, it's intensity. The percentage training at greater than 80% VO2 max is so much higher. In fact, 36% of the time, the elite black athletes are training at high intensity, whereas the elite white athletes are only 14% of the time. So it's likely a training issue. Now I want to point something out to you guys though. Athletes from all around the world go up to Kenya and Ethiopia because that's like the mecca to go train, okay? And they'll go up there and they basically come back and they'll never go back again. Literally never go back again. Why? Because they have horror stories. Because literally the intensities that these athletes are running at are so drastic that they're running their counterparts into the ground. They can't keep pace. They got to leave. And another thing besides genetics I'm going to point out is you also have environment, right? For us in America, our national pastime might be baseball, football, basketball. For them, their heroes are long-distance endurance athletes. That's their heroes. And so what will end up happening is that, and then culturally, for example, a little kid might run barefoot to school, 10 miles to school and 10 miles back, or 15 miles to school and 15 miles back. That's just what they do. So there's something called like the law of readiness, and basically what it has to do is that we have a readiness, a window, to where we train in that window, we're going to make certain adaptations that we don't make the rest of our lives. So if they're running 20 miles a day when they're like 8, we can't overcome that because we're not, right? So, part of it's going to be environmental. So, but let's talk about the laboratory. Tim Noakes has done a lot of work on this, John Hawley. And basically what Tim Noakes and John Hawley did was they had 6 to 9 5-minute cycling bouts at 90% VO2 peak. So what you're looking at here is the speed that they were maintained before interval and then after, and the peak before and after. Then if we look at fatigue resistance, this is the percentage of the peak that they can maintain before, and that's after. Okay, so what does this look like a lot to you? They have greater fatigue resistance. What does that look a lot to you like? Right? Same thing here. We see essentially look at lactate here, pre-interval, post-interval. Looks a lot to me like the Kenyans versus the white athletes. Black athletes, white athletes. So one thing we do know is that interval training is a critical element to this, to training for these endurance sports, especially when you're elite. So how do we do that? Again, we got to go high levels to push this back. Probably anywhere from 70 to 85% from untrained to moderately trained, and then close to VO2 max if you're elite. But to be honest, if you're collegiate, it's okay to train at past 90% to maybe 100%. It's not going to hurt you. So now we know, again, untrained, whatever. But collegiate, greater than 90%, greater than 85%, elite, near 100%. If you want to make it easy, just have them run at VO2 max, most of them. So the question is, we know you need to train at high intensities, but how long should you train? Well, once you find someone's VO2 max, or for you, you could prescribe that based on your heart rate max. So basically, you could be on a treadmill, for example. You go 6 miles an hour, 7, 8, 9, 10, until you find what velocity gets you to heart rate max. Then you step off the treadmill and you step back on. Generally, when you reach heart rate max, you've reached VO2 max. So once you found heart rate max or VO2 max, you step off the treadmill, you get on there, and you time yourself till failure. So when you can't go anymore, let's say that's 100 seconds. Research shows that it usually takes about 60% of that time to reach VO2 max. So if it's 100 seconds, how long did it take you to reach VO2 max? 60 seconds, right? So the point is, every interval you go, you want to hit that magic number of VO2 max. So basically, your interval should last 60% of the time you can maintain VO2 max. So again, 60% of the time you can maintain velocity at VO2 max. How long should we rest? The optimal durations and rest periods. Basically, this study is looking at percent change and like VO2 max. So what you're seeing here with these intervals, you have G1 and G2 and G control. G1, basically, they have a 1 to 2 work rest ratio. So they improve doing intervals, but G2, they use it based on their readiness. So they wait to do their next interval when they get down to 60% of their heart rate max. So, for example, the main thing is that adapts to when you're actually ready to go. Because you might not be ready with a 1 to 2 work rest ratio, or you might be ready before that. This makes sure you're ready, and you make better gains when you do it. So basically, when you get down to 60% of your heart rate max, you can go again. As far as how many intervals, research shows that training 3 or more HIIT sessions per week leads to signs of overtraining, so athletes should probably limit it to 2 sessions. All right, you guys might want to take a break. That's a lot of info. And when you come back, I'll be here. All right, we're back. We're going to talk about the last part of this lecture, and that's running economy. So running economy is essentially the oxygen requirements an individual has at a given running or cycling velocity. So let's say that you go to the store, okay, and you really like let's say you really like Captain Crunch. I love Captain Crunch. I just don't really eat it, but I love it. So especially with like the crunch berries. So anyway, you go to the store, you see the captain, right? And but you're on a college budget. And below, all the way in the bottom, you see a bag, and you see like toasted corn or whatever, or excuse me, toasted oats, right? And it looks just like Captain Crunch, right? But it's half the price. What's more economical, right? The toasted oats, right? So you're gonna go grab the bag of toasted oats. So same thing with running, all right? If you could have two people run 6 miles an hour, but one is using more oxygen to run that 6 miles an hour than the other person. Okay? The person who's using less oxygen is more economical. They use less energy at a given speed. So here they have two subjects. They have the same VO2 max, same maximal oxygen. But if you look at speeds here, 14, 16, 18 kilometers, subject 1 is using less oxygen than subject 2. They're more economical. Now, they're not going to run a race here. They're going to run a race here. So who's going to win the race? The person who conserves energy the most, the more economical person. This is good research by Connolly, and basically what they show is that people with the lowest oxygen cost run the fastest races. Okay? In fact, there's a 0.7 correlation. So actually, excuse me, let me step back. So how do we increase running economy? Going here, there's a 0.7 correlation between years of training and running economy. This suggests the more mileage an individual has run, the greater the running economy. So here's the best way to think about this. Think about the law of practice, guys. Right? If you're a basketball player, you're going to get good at handling a ball by handling a ball. Right? So why is it any different with running? So the more you run, the better you get at your economy. You ever been like out for a walk? It's getting real nice outside. I think it's like 60, 63, 64 tomorrow morning. And so say you're going for a walk, and all of a sudden you hear like behind you like right, noise like that. Okay, so. And then all of a sudden someone runs by you, right? And then you're walking and all you feel is a breeze, just a quick breeze, like whoosh. But you don't hear anything, and someone runs by you, right? And he looks real experienced. So think about who's more experienced, the first or second person? Who's got better running economy, the first or second? Well, clearly the second's got better running economy. The first person's punching all of their energy into the ground. They're very inefficient. Okay? So that's very, very important to understand, is that it takes years to create that perfect stride. And we see this here. Basically a study where they ran about 30 minutes continuous running, or they did long intervals, or they did very short sprints. And notice that oxygen needs decline the most in the long runs and the long intervals, and the least and the sprinting. So basically you need greater training volume, long distance runs to increase running economy. There's another way. This is something that myself and Eamon Flanagan published a while back. Basically we were in grad school on the role of elastic energy and power output. So basically, A.V. Hill proposed this sort of mechanism here. He said we had three elements to contraction that produce force. We have a contractile element here, and this is essentially the muscle tissue, the actin and myosin. We have a series elastic component, which is the tendons. And that while that doesn't use ATP to move us, when you land, the tendons are stretched, and they act like a spring, and they can release that spring to generate force. Then we have the parallel elastic component, which is like the connective tissue. So the actin and myosin here, the series elastic component, the tendons store and release elastic energy like a spring, parallel elastic component, which is the connective tissue, and these store and release energy to generate force. Okay, so the stiffer these are, the more you'll actually store and release energy, right? If they're very lax, you won't store or release energy very well. So what type of activities might stiffen the tendon and connective tissue? Well, I'll give you a hint. It's my favorite activity. It's lifting weights, right? And we'll talk about it in a second, but you have here, what I want you to think about yourself is a mass spring. So here's your body. You have tendons and ligaments. They store energy on the way down, and boom, you release it on the way up. Okay? So they did a study here. Basically look at O2 cost. The lower this is, the more economical. 14 weeks of just endurance training, it didn't change. 14 weeks of endurance training plus strength training went down. So strength training is stiffening the tendons and basically causing you to be more economical. Now this is not training for hypertrophy. This is training for like power and strength, like 1 to 5 repetitions. That's what we say here. So endurance athletes should alternate between explosive power training, 1 to 5 reps with 40-60% 1RM, and heavy strength training, 1 to 5 reps greater than 85% 1RM. They should avoid hypertrophy training, like 8 to 12 with short rest period lengths. In general, this will assist endurance athletes in increasing muscle stiffness, running economy, and performance without adding additional mass. So summary, lactate threshold is what? It's basically that exponential increase in lactate, maximum lactate steady state, maximum amount of lactate you can maintain in a steady state. Untrained or recreationally trained, 50-70% heart rate reserve. Collegiate, greater than 85%. Olympic, near VO2 max. Okay, the duration you should maintain an interval should be 60% of the time you can maintain velocity at VO2 max, 2 to 3 times a week. Running economy is O2 cost at a given velocity. That's increased by long runs and lifting weights. I'll see you guys on the other side.